समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
As much as I had hoped to write about a different subject for my first column of the year 2026, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq delivered a rather interesting remark at the dusk of 2025, bringing attention back to our Western neighbor. He claimed that India has lost its image as the region's net security provider after Operation Sindoor. It seems to be a revelation allegedly conveyed to him by big powers, relayed by Dar to a domestic audience at a year-end presser, picked up by foreign policy watchers across the border, compelling our Lord to clarify a few fundamentals in public interest. Dar's one-line statement has three dimensions that make it interesting to analyze: the conceptual confusion on the meaning of a net security provider, the context within Operation Sindoor, and the purpose of this entire discussion. So first, what is a net security provider? Mr. Dar either misunderstands the concept or has deliberately used it to suggest a meaning it does not quite contain. Just a quick overview of the term, its usage, and its application will convey New Delhi's success at providing security in the larger Indian Ocean region and building collaborative frameworks for the same. Interestingly, the term net security provider in the Indian context originated in Washington. It was at the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2009 when then US Secretary of Defense Robert Gates remarked that the United States looks to India to be a partner and net provider of security in the Indian Ocean and beyond. Now, this formulation resurfaced in the US 2010 Quadrennial Defense Review, which was readily welcomed in New Delhi, as it aligned with how India had long envisioned its maritime security role. But that said, qualitative difference, however, began to arrive only by 2015, when in October that year, during the Naval Commanders Conference in New Delhi, then Defense Minister Manohar Parrikar released India's revised maritime military doctrine titled Ensuring Secure Seas, Indian Maritime Security Strategy, or the IMSS 2015. This was the Navy's first major strategy document since the 26/11 Mumbai attacks, which exposed India's vulnerability to seaborne, state-sponsored terrorism. It prioritized preventing similar maritime threats and addressing a wider set of non-traditional security risks originating at and from the sea. It also expanded India's maritime areas of interest to include the Southwest Indian Ocean and the Red Sea as primary zones. It identified the western coast of Africa, the Mediterranean Sea, and other regions strategically relevant to India's broader maritime vision. What it then means is that even sans a universally accepted definition, the term net security provider is usually meant as enhancing mutual security of more than one country by addressing common security concerns, including dealing with transnational piracy or responding to disasters. More specifically, it encompasses four different activities. First, capacity building. Second, military diplomacy. Third, military assistance. And fourth, direct deployment of military forces to aid or stabilize a situation. So India's maritime vision is best reflected in frameworks such as the Sagar Doctrine, launched in 2015 and now recalibrated to Mahasagar Doctrine in 2025, the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative in 2018, the revival of the security vector within Indian Ocean's Naval Symposium, or the IONS, the establishment of the IFC-IOR at Gurugram, and a range of maritime domain awareness arrangements with Quad partners and the European Union. The Indian Navy's role as a first responder is well documented, from anti-piracy operations to evacuation and protection missions during the Houthi crisis in the Red Sea. India's commitment to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, or the HADR, has been widely acknowledged by international partners, including the United States, with whom India conducted a major joint HADR exercise as recently as April of 2025, which was last year. From India's perspective, Pakistani's navy pursuing its own frameworks of providing disaster relief is a welcome step as it helps global commons and upholds the freedom of navigation in the sea. India believes in building collaborative frameworks, best expressed in the latest iteration of being a net security partner, which means that India is upholding a rules based order at sea. India's vision of Indo-Pacific remains free, open, and inclusive, and not really a zero-sum game. And if you notice, so far I haven't even gotten into the numerical comparisons between Pakistani and Indian Navy, where the latter, on every possible metric, outdoes Pakistan, whether it's capabilities, collaborations, or power projection. Therefore, Mr. Dar's correlation between India's net security provider role and a counter-terror operation like Operation Sindoor is a bit of a non sequitur. Now let's come to the second part, the context. Ishaq Dar's misplaced statement comes on the heels of what his nation deludes as victory. Now, so much has already been written about the divergence between Pakistani version and the Indian position that there is very little that I can add. And that is why I will keep this part as brief as possible. The Pakistani narrative amplifies the first day's BVR face-off and the loss of a few Indian aircraft, while the Indian side correctly highlights the fulfillment of its broader military objectives and the damage inflicted on Pakistani bases and casualties. Globally, stakeholders have followed the details of the first ever BVR battle between two peers with great interest. Now, Pakistan did display a network-centric multi-domain capability, an edge which is largely enabled by China. Beijing, for its part, was eager to see its PL-15 missile tested in real combat against a capable air force like India's. Military aviation analysts watched closely to assess the missile's performance under optimally networked conditions. On 12th of May, India displayed debris of a likely PL-15 missile that Western militaries are studying just as closely. Now, for India, the takeaway is the need to identify and close gaps in its own network-centric warfare capabilities, which, in my opinion, is evident from two major cabinet approvals for India's defense modernization. Now, with due respect to Ishaq Dar, the cost of just these two approvals, about $12 billion in July, followed by an $8 billion in December, approximately $20 billion in 2025, far exceeds Pakistan's entire 2025 defense budget, which stands at roughly $9 billion. Dar's statement, however, also comes up in the context of President Trump's warming up to Pakistan, which has other reasons, timed optimally when India-US trade talks and tariff issues are persisting. Not the subject of this piece today, but certainly something that is implicit in Pakistan's claims. Now, coming back, there is a third dimension to this debate, one that concerns the larger purpose of why we are revisiting the operation 7 months or 8 months after it took place. This is where the Indian side needs to contemplate. And this pertains to rethinking what I'm calling the 3Ds. Now, India did achieve its military objectives, but whether it met its broader strategic aims remains debatable. These aims could be framed around 3Ds: destroy, deter, and deny. Let's take a look at destroy first. India demonstrated precision strikes on 23 terror-linked sites across 9 locations, intending to impose lasting cuts. Yet, within months, much of this infrastructure has begun to reappear. This limits the long-term effect of India's actions. Second, deter. The government declared that a new normal had been established and any terror attack would invite a punitive response from India's side. But this claim was questioned when, after the Red Fort terror attacks, India avoided naming Pakistan despite evidence of Jaish-e-Mohammed links. To many observers, this suggested that the deterrence or a new normal could not really be established. And third, deny. India's diplomatic push to shape global perceptions through delegations of MPs and retired officials did not achieve the desired outcome either. I think you remember that Pakistan secured an IMF tranche and saw renewed diplomatic engagement, even a defense agreement giving Pakistan's nuclear umbrella to Saudi Arabia. Now, all this came alongside General Asim Munir's self-field marshalization and Trump's praise that gave Islamabad added leverage. So, what is the takeaway? New Delhi must not miss the woods for the trees. Securing the nation against a state sponsored terror factory propped up by a bigger power, China, requires not only enhanced capabilities and larger budgets, but also their optimal utilization. And here, the role of robust intel, internal rectifications, and timely deliveries is key. So while Ishaq Dar's comments per se reflect a lack of understanding, New Delhi must continue to cultivate a self-reflective strategic culture and outcome-oriented strategy, building on strengths, addressing gaps, modernizing where needed, and building lasting cooperation frameworks with partners. The nature of deterrence is that it works when your power is perceived in the same way by your adversary, not merely the way it's propagated by you. Long-term military and economic security remains the end game for India. Rest is simply means which must be developed keeping in mind the end game. And I'll be back to discuss more on this in 2026. Stay tuned.